Welcome to the Billboard Mastery Podcast, where you will learn the correct way to identify, evaluate, negotiate, perform due diligence on, select the construction type, build, rent the ad space, and operate billboard signs. And now, here is your host, the guy that built from scratch the largest privately owned billboard company in Dallas-Fort Worth, Frank Rolfe.
America is a crazy place right now. Inflation is soaring, interest rates are going up, businesses are closing, and what all this equals, and when you add it all together, is a very dangerous time for property owners. This is Frank Rolfe, the Billboard Mastery Podcast. We're going to talk about what happens when the property owner, the person you have your billboard on, that person goes bankrupt. Now, when I got in the billboard business back in the 1980s, I was thrust into one of the biggest depressions since the Great Depression. Some claimed it was bigger. That was the Texas S&L crash, which occurred in about 1987 and 1988, and it was a doozy. Every high-rise building in Dallas was posted for foreclosure. Everyone knew someone who just leaped out of a building to their death because they couldn't face their economic reality anymore. I saw lots of property owners go bankrupt, so many I couldn't even name them all. And I had, yes, billboards on properties of people who declared bankruptcy. So what happens when the property owner goes bankrupt? Well, here's how it works. When someone has debt on a property and they go bankrupt, the lender on the property has the ability to cancel any and all leases. That's typical state bankruptcy law. However, there's a hook to that. There's a loophole in that. And that's if the debtor has what's called ratified the lease. Now, everything I'm saying here, check with your state and talk to an attorney. But in many states, if the lender acknowledges the lease, if they sign the lease too, or they sign something saying they've read to and agreed to the lease, they can't discharge it in bankruptcy because they were also a party to it. So that's one way to get around the issue of when the person has debt and they go bankrupt. If you have gone that extra mile and gone to the lender and had them ratify the lease, then often you're saved. The classic case was the property I had that I had a billboard on Highway 75 in North Dallas. Very, very, very valuable location on something called Central Expressway. And the property owner went bankrupt. And the bank wanted to tear my sign down because they wanted to develop that land. They wanted to go ahead and sell that as developable land on Central Expressway, but they couldn't because I had very smartly had them ratify that lease. So their attorney said, oh, you can't break the guy's lease. You're stuck with it. You're stuck with the sign being there. They tried every way to get out of it. They threatened to litigate. They wanted to buy the sign. They tried everything. I wouldn't let them out. I had to keep that sign. It was an important part of my portfolio. Sign is still there today if you drive by. Ultimately, they built something on the property. They integrated the sign into the layout of the property and blends in okay. It's kind of awkward because one of the units, it's now an apartment complex, looks out right into the side of the billboard. I don't know how that works. I guess that person has a very brightly lit sign that's beaming through their window all night. But nevertheless, sign still is there, and it's only there because I had the bank ratify the lease. So if there's debt on it, that's your option. Now, if there's no debt on it, the person declares bankruptcy, it's a whole other matter yet again. Because there was no mortgage between you and the ground lease. So if someone says, hey, I declared bankruptcy, that doesn't necessarily mean your lease can be terminated. Again, talk to an attorney in your state and find out what the rules and regulations are. But if there's no debt on the property, typically what I just described can't occur. Now, another thing that can happen if someone declares bankruptcy is you've signed a ground lease to build the sign, and yet you hadn't built it yet, and they declare bankruptcy. And in that venture, even if they had debt or didn't have debt, if you did not record your lease, they're going to claim they had no record of there being such a lease, and they're going to negate it. If you have a sign that's already up, then they have a burden of knowing or searching for the lease because there must be a lease, there's a sign on the property. But if there's no such thing, if there is no sign to see, then how would they know to search around for the lease? They wouldn't actually have a clue. The bottom line is you need to know the bankruptcy laws in your state like the back of your hand. You need to find out what happens in the event of bankruptcy, and then what can you do to mitigate that? What are the options of you knowing it might happen on the property? What can you do to try and make that work a little better in your favor? Now, another big part of it when a property owner goes bankrupt is you should have seen it coming, because there's property owners come in all different shapes and sizes, and there's ones that are much more potential walking bankruptcy cases than others. People who own property free and clear, in other words, people who have owned property for long periods of time, typically have no debt. It's really hard to go bankrupt when you have no debt. So the property that typically you see go bankrupt are very high-flying, fast-moving, recent purchased properties that typically have big mortgages on them. Another item is raw land. You see a lot more raw land go bankrupt than you do developed property because there's nothing to pay the bills. If you buy a property and there's a car wash on it and you wanted to redevelop it later and build a hotel, well, until then, at least you have the car wash to pay the taxes and the insurance and some of the other costs. Raw land is the worst, though. You have all the costs. You got the mortgage, you got insurance, taxes, everything else. You don't have a penny coming in. So raw land is typically much riskier. If you're going to go in there and build a billboard and it's on raw land, you have to know it's very, very possible bankruptcy might occur and you have to protect yourself. Now, what are some of the worst things that can happen in that bankruptcy? Well, what's going to happen in the bankruptcy is they're going to potentially say they want to remove the sign. That's not the end of the movie. Sometime you can go to them and say, look, you don't want to lose this sign. This sign is income producing. It makes this much a month. A lot of times when there's a bankruptcy, the lender doesn't really know what's going on. They don't know that the billboard is there and they don't know what it pays. And sometimes educating them can make all the difference. I had cases where people would call me up, property had gone under, and I'd say, well, gosh, good news for you. That sign's paying $500 a month. They go, whoa, you pay $500 a month? I didn't know you paid anything. I'd be blown away if you made $100 or $500. That's phenomenal. Another option sometimes is you might buy the property. The property's cheap. Your sign's there. Everything's going good. It's a half acre, acre in size, inexpensive. Well, you probably are going to buy it. You very well might. Another option would be you buy an easement to it. That way they can still develop the property, sell the property off, but the sign still remains, but you paid money for it up front. Another great way to mitigate that. The bottom line is that you always have to be thinking through these issues because bankruptcy is a very real thing. And in America like you have today, which is such a wild animal with so many different things going on like we've never seen before, it's very hard to predict the future. One thing's for sure, though, if you find out what your options are and you mitigate your risk, you'll always feel like a smart person. This is Frank Roth, the Billboard Mastery Podcast. Hope you enjoyed this. Talk to you again soon.
Thank you for listening to the Billboard Mastery Podcast. Be sure to visit us at www.billboardmastery.com, where you can find past episodes of this show, plus an array of information to help you successfully build, buy, and operate billboard signs.